Picture this. You have differential gearing that makes it difficult to run larger than stock tires on your vehicle. You're looking to have better acceleration at the expense of a lower top speed. Well, in this video, we're going to be showing you how to swap out your rear differential in your vehicle to one that is stronger and has better gearing. We're going to be swapping the rear axle in this vehicle to have different gearing. We want to go from the factory 3.45 to 410 gearing, which will give us better acceleration and more torque for hauling. So once I have the truck safely supported, the first thing I did is take off the rear tires on both sides of the rear axle. So next I went into the driver's side of the cab and removed all the trim pieces that were necessary to get to our parking brake assembly. I unscrewed the bolts that hold the fuse panel, which will give us more room to work with. There are 3 10mm bolts holding the assembly together, and the top one is the toughest to reach. Also, there's another bolt attached where the parking brake cable handle is. Now with the whole assembly out and easily accessible, I gently turn the mechanism clockwise to release the tension on the parking brake cable so that I can disconnect it. I'm careful during this step since it's spring-loaded, so I insert my screwdriver carefully to prevent the spring from recoiling. Now, looking under the driver's side of the cab, I see that the parking brake cable is loose, and now with less tension, I can remove it from the connection point right here using my pliers and a little bit of WD-40. I slide the parking brake cable towards the front, as that's where I want to remove it since it will be coming out with the axle. After tapping it a few times, it came out smoothly. Next, I started removing the brake lines because I'll need to reuse these later and reflare them. Gently pried the clips to separate the brake lines from the rear differential. Now it is time to disconnect it from the wheel cylinder. And as you're disconnecting it, make sure you have a container ready in case any brake fluid leaks. I also removed the rear brake hydraulic hose from the rear differential. I carefully disconnected the clips to separate the ABS wiring from the rear differential as well. And don't forget to disconnect the parking brake cable held by a bracket. I unplugged the ABS plug from the ABS wheel speed sensor, and be very careful since these can be fragile since they are old. Now, continuing on, I removed the clips that separate the ABS wiring from the parking brake cable. And be very careful not to break these clips as well. So next, I disconnected the parking brake cable from the equalizer, which allows us to now have our 2 cables separated. So my goal here is to have the 2 parking brake cables come out with the rear differential. So I used a hose clamp over the retention tabs and tightened it down. Then I pulled the parking brake cable towards the rear, which allows it to slip out of its frame bracket. Next, I disconnected the rear drive shaft from the rear differential using a 12-point wrench. Leaving it in first gear helped with loosening them, but I made sure to put a block underneath the rear drive shaft so that way the other end, which is a yoke that goes to the transmission, stays connected so it doesn't leak. I took the shocks off of the rear differential. Be careful when you knock the bolt out to put a nut at the end of the threads, so that way if you hit it with the hammer, you do not accidentally damage the threads. Now with the rear differential jacked up, I removed the axle U-bolts from the mounting plate. I carefully lowered my jack to start separating it. I repeated this procedure on the other side, and I was able to get my old rear differential out of there. Next, I'm preparing to install our newer rear differential, so first I removed the cover and made sure I have a pan underneath, in case there is any leftover fluid in there. We are going to be resealing the diff. So after loosening all 10 bolts, I gently tapped the cover to remove it and inspected the ring and pinion gear, which looks good. So now I need to remove all the old gasket material sealant from the cover to create a clean surface. I sprayed brake cleaner to dissolve much of it and started peeling away the old gasket material. Then, I used an abrasive pad for better cleaning. It's important to make sure that both the cover and the rear differential side are clean. And while the cover is off, I took the opportunity to check to make sure the pinion shaft bolt is tightened. Now that the cover and mating surface are clean, it's time to put on our new gasket. So I used some gasket sealant, but only a light coating of it on both sides of our gasket. After that, I'm pretty much ready to put the cover back on the rear differential. So after doing that, I hand tighten the 10 bolts and then use my torque wrench and torque them in a crisscross pattern to about 25 foot-pounds of torque. So with that part complete, I replaced the rear brake hose with a brand new one. And I need to remove the brake lines from the old hose since I will have to reflare them, mainly because the new wheel cylinders take a 1/16 smaller nut than the previous ones. I'm going to show you how to flare our brake lines using this double flaring toolkit. So this toolkit comes with many dies, and we'll be using the smallest one that fits with our 3/16 brake line tubing. To create a double flare, I first take a pipe cutter and carefully cut our old brake line. It's important to make sure that the cut is even. Once I got a clean cut, I remove the old nut and slide on the new one. Next, I use the brake line holder tool from the toolkit and secured it in a vise so it's easier to work with. I then inserted my brake line into the holder, into the smallest hole, and I made sure the brake line peaks slightly above the first edge of the die like this. Now, once everything is in position, it's important to tighten the holder down so that way the brake line doesn't slip during the pressing process. Alright, I'm almost ready to press it in, and sometimes I like to add a drop of oil on both ends of the die just to make sure it stays lubricated, but I guess that's optional. Next, I place a cone over the die and make sure it is straight. I slowly turn and advance the cone until I can see the brake line turning into a bell shape. After that, I remove the cone to take out the die, and once the die is removed, I put the cone back on and I slowly press the brake line until I can see the chamfer forming. Alright, now it's time to loosen the brake line from the holder and compare it with our existing brake line, and it looks like it will work just fine. So I repeated this process for the other side, and now we have proper brake lines that will work with the correct fittings. And I would recommend, if it's your first time using a flaring tool like this, make sure you try it out on brake tubing that you can use for practice. Sometimes it takes time to learn this tool and to get the flaring down correctly. Alright, once the brake lines are complete, everything else is the opposite procedure of taking it out. A few things to consider though, is if you're replacing the rear drum brakes, it's always a good idea to spray them down with water and to make sure the dust is not airborne. Because depending on the age of your drum brakes, they may contain asbestos, which is something you do not want to breathe in. So spray them down, wear a mask, make sure you wear the right personal protection equipment, and be in a well-ventilated area. Check to make sure there's no leaks coming from the rear differential and the brake lines. Also, the reason why this new rear axle is stronger than the old one is because of the ring gear diameter. Our new ring gear diameter is 8.8 inches compared to our old one, which is only 7.5 inches. But anyways guys, I hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching.